They laughed at her while she was still sitting at their table. 30 people watched Trenton Hargrove announce to the room that he was replacing her. Replacing her, like a broken appliance, like something that had served its purpose and needed to be discarded before it caused further embarrassment. His mother was smiling. His sister was already refilling her champagne glass. The investors were nodding the way powerful men nod when they've already decided the outcome and are simply waiting for the body to stop moving. Nadia Velez sat at the end of that enormous dining table and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart. She'd already protected that. Something older, something she'd spent 3 years carefully rebuilding after every small cruelty Trenton had inflicted in private, finally dragged itself into the light where everyone could see it. She pressed her fingernails into her palm beneath the tablecloth. She did not cry. She would not give them that. If you've ever been humiliated in front of people who were supposed to love you, stay until the very end of this story. Because what happens next will show you that some debts are paid in ways the people who destroy you never see coming. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The snow had started 2 hours before the dinner began, the kind of heavy, suffocating Chicago snowfall that reduced visibility on the expressways to near zero and turned the manicured hedges of the North Shore into shapeless white masses pressing up against wrought iron fences. Nadia had driven herself. She always drove herself to Hargrove events because Trenton's family made her feel less exposed when she arrived in her own car and could therefore leave in it, and that small autonomy, that one escape hatch, was something she had quietly protected for 3 years without ever examining too closely why she needed it. She sat in the parking area outside the Hargrove mansion for 4 minutes before going in. She knew because she watched the clock on her dashboard. 4 minutes of sitting with the heat running and the wipers pushing snow off the windshield in slow arcs, staring at the lit windows of a house she had never once felt welcome in, telling herself the same thing she always told herself before these evenings. Get through it, get home, figure out the rest later. The mansion was Georgian style, 3 stories, columns flanking the front entrance, every window glowing amber from inside. It looked exactly like what it was, the home of people who had possessed money for long enough that they'd stopped noticing it, which meant they'd also stopped noticing what it did to everyone around them. Nadia pulled her coat tight and walked to the front door. The housekeeper, a small woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who had worked for the Hargroves for over 20 years, and who always looked at Nadia with something close to apology in her eyes, took her coat at the door without a word. But before Nadia moved toward the sound of voices, Mrs. Alvarez caught her wrist, just briefly, just long enough to say very quietly, "You look beautiful tonight, Miss Velez." It was such a small thing. Nadia almost walked away from it, but something in the woman's tone made her pause. Something underneath the pleasantry that felt less like a compliment and more like preparation. Like the last kind thing you say to someone before something bad happens. "Thank you," Nadia said. She walked into the formal living room. There were roughly 30 people. She recognized most of them, the usual orbit of Hargrove family gatherings. Relatives, business associates, the kind of people who traveled in a tight, self-referential social world, where everyone knew everyone else's net worth and social ranking within a margin of error. There were faces she'd seen at charity events and board dinners. A few she recognized from the society column in the Tribune. Trenton was at the center of the room, holding a glass of scotch, wearing a charcoal suit that had been fitted by a tailor he visited twice a year, and smiling the way he smiled when he wanted a room to feel like he was already winning whatever contest was underway. He saw Nadia. The smile didn't change. That was the first thing she noticed. It didn't warm or soften the way it used to 2 years ago when he still sometimes looked at her like she was someone he had chosen rather than someone he'd accumulated. It just stayed exactly as it was, calibrated, performing. "There she is," he said. A few heads turned, a few polite smiles were extended. Nadia moved through the room, doing what she always did at these events. Keeping her posture correct, her expression composed, making the kind of small, pleasant conversation that required nothing of her and left no mark. She was good at it by now. She'd had practice. Trenton's mother, Claudette Hargrove, was seated near the fireplace in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Nadia's monthly rent, flanked by 2 women Nadia vaguely recognized as relatives from the Hargrove side who visited from Boston every few months. Claudette looked at Nadia the way she always looked at Nadia, with a precise, practiced neutrality that communicated dislike without ever giving it a name you could argue with. Nadia. Just the name. Flat. Delivered the way you deliver a name to a waiter who's brought you the wrong order. Claudette. Nadia matched the tone. She had learned, slowly and at some cost, that warmth in the direction of Claudette Hargrove was not returned. It was simply absorbed and used as evidence of Nadia's inferior social position. Neutral was safer. Trenton's sister Brinley was by the bar with her husband, a soft-faced man named Patrick, who worked in Trenton's company in some capacity Nadia had never fully understood, and who spoke almost exclusively in sports metaphors. Brinley was 2 years younger than Trenton, and where Trenton was calculated in his cruelty, Brinley was impulsive. She said what she thought with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for saying it. "Bryn," Nadia said, passing her. Brinley turned, looked at Nadia's dress, a deep burgundy wrap dress, understated, professional, and said, "That's interesting. I almost bought something like that for a work function." Nadia said, and kept moving. The dinner was served at 7. Nadia sat where she was placed, at the far end of the long formal table, away from the center of conversation, a positioning she had stopped fighting about a year ago. She sat between a business associate of Trenton's whose name she kept forgetting, and Trenton's aunt from Evanston who was pleasant enough but talked almost exclusively about her renovation project. The food was excellent. The wine was expensive. The conversation at the far end of the table moved in its usual current: business, properties, market conditions, the kind of talk that excluded her not through hostility, but through simple irrelevance. She ate. She answered questions when asked. She smiled at the appropriate moments. She noticed twice that Trenton glanced at her from the other end of the table with an expression she couldn't name. Not cruel, exactly. Something more like a man preparing himself. She filed it away. She should have paid more attention to it. The announcement came between the main course and dessert. Trenton stood up. He clinked his fork against his glass in the way people do when they want attention, and the table quieted with the ease of people who were accustomed to giving Trenton Hargrove their attention when he wanted it. "I want to take a moment," he said, "while everyone I care about is in the same room." Nadia looked at him. He was still smiling. The scotch glass was in his left hand. "As most of you know, Nadia and I have been together for 3 years. He paused. The room was very quiet. "And I think everyone here, family, friends, colleagues, deserves to know that the engagement announcement we've been discussing is not going to happen." The silence stretched. Nadia heard her own breathing. She did not move. Trenton set his glass down. "Nadia and I are not getting married. We've reached the end of where this was going, and I think it's better to be clear about that than to let it drag on any further." Someone at the other end of the table made a quiet sound, somewhere between surprise and something less charitable. A few people looked at Nadia. Most did not. Nadia kept her hands flat on the tablecloth. "I've tried," Trenton continued, and here his voice shifted slightly, took on the tone of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say, which he had, obviously, because Trenton didn't do anything without rehearsal. "I've genuinely tried to make this work, in spite of certain limitations. Nadia is a caring person, that's real. But caring isn't enough when there are fundamental incompatibilities." "Incompatibilities," Nadia said. Her own voice surprised her. She hadn't intended to speak. Trenton looked at her. "Yes." "Define that." The table shifted. Uncomfortable. A few people looked at their plates. Trenton's expression didn't flicker. "I don't think this is the time. You brought it up in front of 30 people, Nadia said. Her voice was level. Her pulse was not. "Define it." He tilted his head. And here was the thing about Trenton Hargrove, the thing she had taken too long to understand. He did not back down from confrontation. He leaned into it. He was most comfortable when he had an audience and someone to dismantle. "You don't come from the same world, Nadia. You never did. I thought it wouldn't matter. I was wrong." "Because your business is failing," she said. Something moved across his face. Fast. Gone. "Trenton's marrying the Whitfield girl," Claudette said from her end of the table. Calm. Delivered with the satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting to say it for longer than tonight. "Caroline Whitfield. The announcement will be formal next month. Gerald Whitfield has agreed to a significant investment that will restructure the company. He's selling you to fix his balance sheet, Nadia said. She was looking at Trenton. Don't embarrass yourself, he said. I'm not the one embarrassing anyone. She looked around the table. 30 faces, most of them avoiding her eyes. I'm the one who moved here for him. Left my position at Northwestern Memorial. Spent 3 years attending events I wasn't comfortable at. Being civil to people who weren't civil to me. Defending him in conversations I shouldn't have needed to defend him in. She stopped. And this is how it ends. In front of strangers. You're not exactly a stranger to drama, Brinley said from down the table. Bryn. Patrick put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. She always does this, Brinley continued, makes herself the victim. You knew what this family was when you came into it. You were a nurse from Humboldt Park. That's not a criticism. It's a fact. You were never going to fit. Mom said it from the beginning. Claudette said nothing. Her silence confirmed everything. Nadia looked at Brinley for a long moment. Then she looked at Trenton. You couldn't have done this privately, she said. A phone call, a conversation, something that didn't require an audience. You needed this. Trenton took a slow sip of his scotch. You're overreacting. Tell me why. Tell me one reason you needed 30 people in the room for this. He set the glass down, smiled. Because you don't have a family to tell, Nadia. Everyone you would have told is right here. The table went very quiet. Nadia sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. She counted them. Then she folded her napkin, set it beside her plate, pushed her chair back. You're right, she said. I don't. She stood up. She walked the length of the table. No one spoke. No one stood. She collected her bag from the sideboard near the door where she'd left it, and she walked past Mrs. Alvarez, who was standing near the kitchen entrance holding a dessert tray, and who looked at Nadia with eyes that had already accepted what was happening. She almost made it out without another word. Then Trenton called after her, from where he was still seated at the center of the table, because he couldn't let the room have the image of her walking away cleanly. She should be grateful, he said, loud enough that every person at that table heard it, that we tolerated her this long. 2 or 3 people laughed. Short, uncomfortable sounds. The kind of laughter people produce not because something is funny, but because they need to choose a side quickly and have chosen the easier one. Nadia pushed through the front door. The cold hit her like a physical thing. 12 degrees. The snow was coming down harder now, the flakes thick and wet, and it was already accumulating on her car and on the stone steps and on the bare branches of the elms that lined the Hargrove driveway. She stood on the top step and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the cold air sharp enough that she could feel it all the way down. She was not going to cry. She had made herself that promise inside the room, and she was keeping it now, out here in the dark with the snow coming down and the sound of the dinner resuming behind the closed door, the low clink of glassware, the murmur of conversation restarting, the world moving on without her at the exact speed it always had. She pulled her coat tighter, looked for her keys. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from the cold, not entirely, and she had to dig through her bag twice before she found them. Mrs. Alvarez appeared at the door behind her. She had followed Nadia out without her coat on, hugging herself against the cold, and when Nadia turned, the woman's expression held something she recognized as genuine feeling amid a life that had required her to suppress most of it. Miss Valez, she spoke quietly, glancing back at the closed door. I want you to know what happened in there. You don't have to. I want to. A pause. They have no idea who they're insulting. Nadia looked at her. What does that mean? Mrs. Alvarez seemed to decide something. It means some things are already in motion that they don't know about yet. She held Nadia's gaze for a moment. Then she looked past her toward the street, and her expression changed. And I think they're arriving now. Nadia turned. She heard them before she saw them clearly. The low, controlled sound of powerful engines moving slowly through residential streets. The kind of mechanical sound that had money and purpose woven through it equally. Then the headlights appeared at the top of the street, emerging through the falling snow in a long, disciplined line that didn't hurry and didn't slow, that moved with the absolute certainty of something that had never needed to rush because nothing had ever required it to. 20 armored SUVs. Black. Each one identical, windows tinted past the legal limit, moving in formation with the precision of something military and the restraint of something that had learned to look civilian. Behind them, two Rolls-Royces, also black, longer than anything else on that street. The convoy came to a complete stop at the base of the Hargrove driveway with the quiet coordination of a unit that had performed this movement 100 times. Engines idling. No one visible yet through any window. The entire street, the neighbors' homes, the other parked cars, the lit windows, seemed to contract slightly in the presence of whatever had just arrived. Then the lead vehicle's front passenger door opened. The man who stepped out was broad, clean-shaved, wearing a dark suit with no tie, moving with the kind of economy that came from years of training how not to waste motion. He walked up the driveway through the snow without appearing to notice it, stopped at the base of the steps, looked at Nadia. "Miss Valles." His voice was measured, not loud. It didn't need to be. Nadia didn't move. "I don't know you." "No, ma'am." He held eye contact. "But the boss does. He's been waiting." Nadia stared at him. "Who?" "Luca Moretti," the man said. "He sent us for you." The name landed in the cold air and just sat there. Nadia had heard that name exactly twice in her life. Once from a former colleague at Northwestern Memorial who had mentioned it in passing as the name attached to a private wing donation that came through without a conversation or a press event or any of the things wealthy donors usually required. And once from a prosecutor she'd sat near at a charity auction 2 years ago, who had leaned towards his companion and said the name in the tone people use when they're explaining why something cannot be touched. She didn't know what to do with this information. She looked back at the house. Through the front window, she could see the shapes of people still at the table. Then she saw movement. Someone had noticed the convoy. 2 faces appeared at the window, then 3. "I'm not going anywhere with someone I've never met," Nadia said. "That's fair." The man reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, sealed. Her name written on the outside in handwriting she didn't recognize. "He said you'd say that. He asked me to give you this." She took it. Her fingers were still cold. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. 3 sentences in the same handwriting as the envelope. "You were working the night of February 14th, 7 years ago, during the ice storm. A man came in through the service entrance of Northwestern Memorial's trauma bay with a wound you treated for 40 minutes, while he told you his name was James. You told him that whoever he was outside that room, inside it, he was just a patient, and you were going to take care of him. I never forgot that. I'm asking you to trust me one more time." Nadia read it twice. The night came back to her in pieces. Not as a story she told, but as sensory fragments she'd never entirely discarded. The worst ice storm in a decade. The trauma bay overloaded. A man helped in by 2 others who vanished almost immediately. A gunshot wound to the left side, presenting as a gang-related injury that she'd treated without asking questions because that was the job and she had always done the job. He had been quiet, focused, in remarkable control of himself for someone losing blood. He had told her his name was James. She had called him that for 40 minutes. She had not thought about him since. She looked up from the letter. "He's there now?" she said. "At wherever you're taking me?" "Yes, ma'am." The front door of the Hargrove house opened behind her. She heard Trenton's voice, different now, sharper, higher, the tone he used when his composure slipped. "What the hell is this?" He was on the steps. He'd brought 2 of the men from the dinner with him. "Nadia, who are these people?" She didn't turn around. The bodyguard held the rear door of the nearest Rolls-Royce open. "Nadia." Trenton's voice again, closer. "Do not get in that car. Do you understand? You don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, "is leaving." She walked down the steps and got into the car. The door closed behind her. The interior was dark leather and warmth, and the sound of the engines muffling everything outside to something distant and manageable. She sat back in the seat, pressed her palms flat against her thighs to stop the shaking. Through the tinted window, she could see Trenton standing at the base of the steps with the snow coming down on him, and even through the glass, she could see the way his expression had changed. The easy contempt of 20 minutes ago replaced by something different, something with fear underneath it, though he hadn't yet fully understood what he was afraid of. The convoy began to move. She watched him shrink in the window until the snow erased him. The drive took 45 minutes. No one spoke to her. The bodyguard from the driveway rode in the front passenger seat, facing forward, hands in his lap, motionless as the Chicago streets moved past outside. The North Shore transitioning to Lakeshore Drive, transitioning to the dark, enormous presence of Lake Michigan, opening up to the right, the water invisible in the darkness, but its scale felt anyway, the wind off it rocking the vehicle slightly on the exposed stretches of road. Nadia sat with the letter in her lap and tried to be rational. She was a 30-year-old woman who had just left a dinner where her fiancé had publicly ended their engagement, been driven away from that dinner by an armored convoy sent by a man whose name made prosecutors lower their voices, and was now heading toward a destination she did not know, based on 3 sentences written on a piece of paper. When she laid it out like that, it sounded insane, but she had nothing left in the direction she'd come from. That was the honest answer. 3 years of her life had just been disassembled in front of an audience. The apartment she'd moved into was technically Trenton's building. Her position at Northwestern Memorial was gone. She'd left it herself 2 years ago at Trenton's request, for reasons he'd framed as being about their future and that she now understood had been about keeping her dependent. Her savings were intact. That much she'd protected, quietly and deliberately, because somewhere in the back of her mind she had always suspected she might need them. But the life she'd been building was gone. So she sat in the car and looked at the lake and breathed. The convoy turned off the main road through a gate that opened ahead of them without anyone visibly triggering it. The drive that followed was long, lined with mature trees whose branches were thick with snow, the headlights cutting through the dark in a tunnel of white. And then the trees ended, and the house appeared. House was the wrong word. It was a compound set back from the lake on a natural elevation, stone and steel and glass in proportions that managed to look both fortified and elegant, lit from the outside in ways that suggested the lighting had been designed by someone who understood that power communicates itself in light and shadow as much as in architecture. There were men visible at the perimeter. Not many, not visible in a way that advertised itself, but present in the way that certain things are always present in places like this, woven into the landscape if you knew how to look for them. The lead SUV stopped. The Rolls-Royce stopped. The bodyguard, she still didn't know his name, opened her door. She stepped out into the cold again. The interior of the main building was warmer than she expected, and quieter than the outside suggested. Wide stone floors, high ceilings, a staircase that curved upward at the far end of an entrance hall that was larger than her old apartment. The furnishings were expensive, but not ostentatious. The taste of someone who knew what they wanted and didn't need anyone else to confirm it was correct. There were no paintings on the walls in the immediate spaces she moved through. There were maps, architectural drawings, a large antique globe on a wooden stand near the staircase base, books in shelving units that looked like they were actually read. She was shown to a room off the main hall, a sitting room, fire burning in a stone fireplace, 2 chairs, a small table with water and a glass already set out. No one else in the room. The bodyguard said, "He'll be with you in a few minutes," and closed the door. Nadia stood in the center of the room for a moment, then sat in one of the chairs, then stood again, then walked to the window. It faced the lake, which was now visible as a massive dark presence beyond the grounds, the snow falling into it and disappearing. She stood there and breathed. The door opened. The man who walked in was not what she had assembled in her mind during the drive. She had expected something more theatrical, the performance of power, the carefully maintained intimidation. She'd constructed a version of Luca Moretti from the fragments she knew. The name said in careful voices, the donation without a press event, the convoy, the compound. What she got was a man in his late 30s, dark-featured, not quite 6 feet, wearing a dark sweater and no jacket, who moved into the room with his hands at his sides and stopped about 8 feet away from her, and looked at her with an expression that was hard to read, but didn't feel like performance. There were shadows under his eyes, a small scar along the left side of his jaw that she recognized, distantly, as the mark of a wound that had healed without sutures. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they've carried in their mind for a long time and are now adjusting to in its actual dimensions. "Nadia Valles," he said. His voice was lower than the bodyguard's, quieter. He didn't fill the room with it. "You look different than I expected," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. You don't. She looked at the scar. You said your name was James. I needed to say something. He sat in the other chair, not asking permission, not performing it, simply sitting the way someone sits when they're in their own home and have decided the conversation is going to be real. James was my uncle. It was the first name that came to me. Were you in danger that night? I was in the middle of something that had gone wrong. Yes. She sat down across from him. Who shot you? Someone I'd trusted longer than I should have. He said it without feeling, or with feeling that had been processed so many times it had compressed into something unrecognizable. He's not a problem anymore. Nadia filed that away. You've been watching me, she said, not watching. He reached forward and poured water into the glass on the table, one glass, hers, not his, and sat back again. Keeping track. There's a difference. I knew where you were. I knew in general terms how your life was going. I didn't surveil you. How is that a difference? Because I never acted on it. Because you'd made choices that were yours to make, and I had no right to insert myself into them. He paused. Until what happened with Hargrove made it impossible not to. What did you know about Hargrove? He was quiet for a moment. Enough. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her directly. His company has been insolvent for 14 months. He's been hiding it. Some of the methods he used to hide it involved misrepresenting assets he had joint interest in with third parties, one of whom is connected to my operations. My attorneys found out. And in the process of looking at his finances, I saw other things. A pause. The way he's treated you. Some of it is documented in ways he doesn't know is documented. Other parts of it my people observed directly during the last 8 months. You had people watching us. Watching him. You were in the frame. That's still an answer that should bother me. Yes, he said simply. It should. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't flinch from it. He seemed genuinely comfortable being looked at and evaluated, or genuinely accustomed to it, which was not the same thing. The letter said you were asking me to trust you, she said. I'm asking for a conversation. You can leave after it. I'm not keeping you here. He said it without either softness or edge, just fact. My men will drive you wherever you want to go. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever. You're not a prisoner. Why did you send 20 cars? Something crossed his face. Because I didn't know what condition Hargrove would be in when I sent for you. And because in my world, sending 20 cars instead of 2 is a message that doesn't need to be spoken. A message to who? To him. And to anyone who might be watching. That you are under protection. Nadia sat with that. You said in the letter you wanted to repay a debt, she said. That's true. So tell me what you actually want. He didn't look away. I want to offer you something. Safety, resources, a legal and financial structure that makes you untouchable by Hargrove or anyone he sends. A pause. And I want you to consider a formal arrangement. What kind of arrangement? A marriage. He said it the way someone says a word they've practiced saying plainly because they know it will sound otherwise. Not a real one in the beginning. A legal and social structure that puts you in a position where anyone who moves against you moves against me. Given who I am, that ends most threats before they start. Nadia stared at him. You're serious, she said. I don't make proposals I'm not serious about. I just got publicly dumped 3 hours ago. I know. And you want me to agree to marry someone I met 7 years ago for 40 minutes while he was bleeding on a trauma table? He said nothing. This is the most insane conversation I've ever had, she said. Probably. She stopped. What are you exactly? Because I know what people say you are, and I know what your letterhead would say you are, and I'm guessing those are fairly different. Both of those things are true. He didn't elaborate. He didn't minimize. You can decide how much of that matters to you. It matters. Then you should know that what I do and who I am in that world will never be directed at you. It won't touch you unless you choose to step toward it, and I will not make you choose anything. He leaned forward slightly. What I'm offering is a structure, not a cage. You stay if you want to stay. You leave if you want to leave. Every document I'm proposing gives you exit rights that are real and enforceable. Nadia looked at the fire for a moment. You're a stranger, she said. I know. I don't trust you. I know that too. He was quiet for a beat. But you got in the car. She looked back at him. Outside, through the glass, the lake was invisible in the dark and the snow, but she could feel it out there. Enormous, cold, deep, past measuring, moving beneath the surface in ways that had nothing to do with the weather above it. Show me the documents, she said. Luca Moretti stood, walked to the door, opened it, and spoke quietly to someone outside, then turned back to her. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. Hargrove knows my name now. He saw the convoy. He knows who sent it. His voice remained level, but something shifted underneath it. Something that wasn't threat exactly, but was adjacent to it, was the foundation of it. That means his next move won't be rational. Men like him, when they lose the thing that was holding them together, they do something stupid. He looked at her. I want you to be prepared for that. Nadia thought about Trenton standing in the snow outside his family's house, watching the convoy pull away. She thought about the expression on his face, not the grief of losing someone, because this had never been grief, but the wounded pride of a man who had structured his entire self-image around having things, and had just had one of those things taken away in front of everyone. He'll blame me, she said. He already does. And that makes me dangerous to be around. It makes you someone who needs protection. He said it evenly, which is what I'm offering, among other things. The door opened and a different man entered carrying a leather folder which he set on the small table before leaving without a word. Luca sat back down. The folder sat between them. Nadia looked at it, then at him. If I look at these, she said, I'm not agreeing to anything. Correct? And if I decide no, all of this, you send me wherever I want to go, no argument. Correct. She leaned forward and opened the folder. The first page was a protection agreement. The second was a financial structure document. The third was a proposed legal arrangement. Not what she'd expected. Not something performative. Something careful. Something written by someone who had thought about what she would need rather than what she would be expected to accept. She read for 20 minutes. Luca sat quietly across from her, not watching her read, looking instead toward the dark window and the invisible lake beyond it, holding whatever he was thinking in the compressed, practiced stillness of a man who had learned long ago how to wait. She turned the last page. This gives me full exit rights, she said. Yes. At any time, for any reason. Yes. She looked at the last clause, read it twice, then sat back. I have conditions, she said. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to, she didn't have the word for it. Approval was too small. Relief was too emotional. It was the expression of a man who had built a risk on a specific read of a person and was watching that read prove correct. Tell me, he said. She was about to. But before she could speak, the bodyguard appeared at the doorway, not entering, but present in the threshold with a particular quality of stillness that Nadia was already learning to read as the stillness of someone delivering bad news with discipline. Sir, his voice was flat. Hargrove's men are at the north gate. Luca was on his feet before the last word landed. He looked at Nadia once. Something passed between them. Not reassurance, not fear, something more complicated and more honest than either. Stay here, he said. Don't give me orders, she said. He stopped. She stood up from the chair. Outside, past the window, through the falling snow, she could see lights. Not the gentle amber of the estate's perimeter lighting, but something else. Headlights. Multiple. Approaching from the direction of the north tree line. This was not going to end quietly. This was, she understood with a clarity that surprised her by arriving so fast and so cold, only the beginning. Well, the north gate was a quarter-mile from the main building, at the end of a service road that ran along the tree line separating the Moretti property from the public road beyond it. Nadia knew this because she had studied the layout of the room she was in. The window, the angle of the perimeter lights, the direction the bodyguard had looked when he delivered the news, and in the absence of information, she defaulted to observation, which was a habit built over years of working rooms where the wrong read could cost someone their life. Luca was already moving toward the door. I said, stay here, he repeated, without looking back. And I said, don't give me orders. She was on her feet, the folder closed on the table behind her. If Trenton sent men here, this is because of me. You don't get to handle it in another room while I sit by the fireplace. He stopped in the doorway, turned. Up close, in the direct light of the corridor beyond the sitting room, she could see his face more clearly than she had in the warmer ambiance of the fireplace. The tiredness in it, the particular quality of attention that came from a man who processed threat the way other people processed weather, constantly, automatically, without drama. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. You don't know what's at that gate. Neither do you yet. Something shifted in his jaw. Not anger, something that was working around it. You'll stay back. You don't move past the main corridor until I know what we're dealing with. That, she said, I can agree to. The corridor outside the sitting room connected to a wider central hallway that ran the length of the ground floor, stone-floored, lit by recessed lighting that had been turned down to something lower than before. She noticed it immediately, the shift in the light, and realized it hadn't been her imagining it. Someone had dimmed the interior lighting on purpose, making the building darker from the outside, making it harder to read from a distance. 3 men moved past her in the corridor without acknowledging her, moving with the focused economy of people who had a specific task and were executing it. All of them were armed, and not visibly, but she knew how to read the way a jacket sits on a body, and she knew. She pressed herself against the wall to let them pass. The bodyguard from the driveway, she still didn't know his name, materialized beside her. Ma'am, I need you to stay in this corridor. I heard, what's at the gate? He looked at her for a half beat, calculating something. 3 vehicles. Hargrove's personal security. They're not breaching. They're parked outside. One of them called in on the external line. Trenton called? Not him personally. One of his people. Requesting a handoff. A handoff. She heard the words and felt something tighten in her chest. He wants me back. The bodyguard's expression didn't change. He's framing it as a welfare check. Says you were taken against your will. Nadia laughed. It was a short, involuntary sound, not because it was funny. He knows that's not going to work, she said. Yes, ma'am. We believe this is a positioning move. Establish a version of events for any witnesses or record. He paused. There are no witnesses, and we don't keep external records. She heard Luca's voice before she saw him, somewhere ahead and to the right, past a set of open double doors, speaking quietly to someone on a phone or a radio. She couldn't make out the words, but she could read the cadence, the flat, clipped rhythm of a man giving specific instructions he didn't expect to repeat. Then he came back into the corridor. He looked at the bodyguard first, then at Nadia, then at the bodyguard again. Marco, tell Reyes to hold the gate. Nobody enters. Hargrove's people can sit in the cold as long as they want. And the welfare check framing? Document our response. She came here voluntarily. The door is open. She can leave whenever she wants. He didn't look at Nadia when he said it, but it was said for her benefit. Make sure that's on record. Understood. Marco left. Luca and Nadia stood alone in the corridor. He's not going to stop, she said. No. This is him scared. When Trenton gets scared, he does something visible and stupid to feel like he has control. I know. You said you knew about him. How much? Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the double doors, and she followed him because he didn't tell her not to, and she would have anyway. Through the doors was a room that was clearly used as a working space. A long table, a wall of screens, maps both digital and physical, 2 men working quietly at separate stations who looked up when they entered and then looked back down. The room smelled faintly of coffee and something else she couldn't name. The screens showed exterior feeds, the gate, the perimeter, the service road, the public road beyond. On one feed, she could see 3 sets of headlights parked at the gate. On another, she could see Marco walking the service road. Luca stood at the table and turned one of the physical documents toward her. It was a financial summary. Dense, annotated in 2 different handwriting styles. His company started hemorrhaging in April of last year, Luca said. Overextended on 3 commercial developments simultaneously, interest rates moved against him. 2 of his anchor tenants broke lease. He hid it through accounting structures his father's firm set up in the 90s that nobody had examined properly in 15 years. He pointed at a section of the document. He also borrowed against assets he didn't have clear title to. including 2 joint interest properties with a company that operates under my legal umbrella. He didn't know the connection. Correct. By the time he found out, he was already in default. My attorneys have been in a quiet holding pattern for 6 months, waiting to see if he'd resolve it. A pause. He hasn't. And his solution, the Whitfield engagement, gives him capital injection, but it requires Caroline Whitfield's father to believe the company is structurally sound, which it isn't. So the engagement is built on a fraud that will unravel inside 12 months. Nadia looked at the document, then at him. You've been preparing for this. I've been protecting my interests. And I'm one of them? He met her eyes. You became relevant when I understood what he'd been doing to you. The financial exposure was already there. You didn't create it. But I'm useful to you. Yes. He didn't flinch from it. Honesty seems more appropriate right now than making you feel better. She looked at him for a long moment. What did you find out about how he'd been treating me? Something changed in his face. Small, controlled. But she caught it. He isolated you, Luca said, systematically, over roughly 18 months. Your position at Northwestern Memorial, your apartment, your financial dependency on him. He also had a pattern. There are communications between him and at least 2 people in his circle, going back a year and a half, discussing you in terms that... He stopped. It doesn't matter what the terms were. It matters to me. They discussed you like a liability, he said, like something he'd acquired that had stopped being useful and needed to be managed until he found a more advantageous replacement. He said it flatly, without cruelty. The way you deliver information that hurts because the truth of it is the only useful thing about it. The engagement announcement tonight wasn't a decision he made tonight. He's been planning it for 4 months. The dinner was theater. He wanted an audience. The room was very quiet. One of the men at the station shifted in his chair. Nadia stood with the document in her hands and felt something move through her that wasn't grief and wasn't surprise and wasn't anger, exactly. It was something older than all of those. The particular exhaustion of a thing you have told yourself was different than what it turns out to be. The cost of all the small negotiations you made with yourself to keep believing in a version of reality that was never true. She put the document back on the table. On the monitors, she said, "Can you see if he's there? At the gate?" One of the men looked at Luca. Luca nodded. The man adjusted one of the feeds, zoomed. The image on screen was night vision quality. Green-gray, grainy at the edges. The 3 vehicles were clearly visible, 2 men standing outside the lead vehicle. And she leaned closer to the screen. In the rear window of the second vehicle, a shape that could have been a man in a pale shirt. "That's him," she said. "He came himself." "Apparently." Luca's voice was measured. "That's not security, then. That's personal." "Yes." She stood back from the screen. "He's not trying to get me back. He doesn't want me back. He wants to see it." She looked at Luca. "He wants to see where I am. Who has me. What the situation looks like from the outside." She paused. "He's assessing whether you're a real threat or a piece of theater." Luca looked at her with an expression she was becoming more able to read. Not surprise, but interest, the genuine and unsentimental variety. "That's correct," he said. "So what do you do?" "Nothing," he said. "He can look. He won't see anything worth acting on tonight. By morning, he'll be dealing with problems that make tonight irrelevant." "What problems?" "The holding pattern ends tonight. My attorneys file first thing tomorrow." A pause. Hargrove's financial irregularities become a matter of public record. Nadia processed this. "You were going to do that anyway. The timeline accelerated. Because of me. Because of what he did tonight." He looked at her directly. "There's a difference." She wasn't sure there was, but she let it sit. Trenton's convoy left the gate at midnight. She watched them go on the monitor. The 3 sets of headlights backing onto the public road. The slow, deliberate departure of people who wanted to look like they were leaving on their own terms. She watched until the screen showed nothing but the empty gate and the dark tree line and the snow still falling. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Luca said, "There's a guest wing on the 2nd floor. You can sleep, leave, or keep talking. Your choice." "Keep talking," she said. Or they sat in the working room until 3 in the morning. It was not the conversation she had expected. She had come in braced for negotiation, the careful transactional language of two people who understood they were useful to each other, but nothing more. Instead, what happened was something less comfortable and more real. He asked her questions. Not about Trenton, not about the incident at the dinner, about her work, about the trauma bay, about what it had been like to leave Northwestern Memorial and whether she had regretted it. She asked him questions back. He answered most of them, not all. The ones he didn't answer, he named clearly. "I'm not going to tell you that," said without apology or elaboration, which she found unexpectedly easier to accept than evasion would have been. She learned that he had built his legitimate businesses from a financial base that preceded any criminal enterprise, an inheritance from a father who had himself operated in gray territory, a fact Luca named without pride or shame, only with the precision of someone describing the geography of the place they came from. She learned that the criminal operation he ran was primarily financial, logistics, protection, information, and that he had spent 12 years methodically building legitimate infrastructure around it with the explicit long-term goal of full transition. She did not know whether to believe this. She filed it as information she did not yet have enough to evaluate. She told him that she had left nursing not because of Trenton's pressure alone, but because she had been burning out before he arrived, and his pressure had given her an excuse to do something she'd been too scared to do on her own initiative, which was stop. That admitting this was easier than she expected it to be. "What would you go back to," he asked, "if you could structure it however you wanted?" She looked at the table. "Community work, not a hospital system. Direct, underserved neighborhoods. The kind of care that doesn't make it into the gaps that the institutional system leaves." She paused. "I've thought about it more than I've admitted to anyone." "Why haven't you done it?" "Money, infrastructure, the kind of backing that takes years to build or that you already have to know someone to access." She looked at him. "Which you're aware of." "I have resources," he said simply, "and no interest in attaching conditions to how you use them." "That's a large offer for someone you've had 4 hours of conversation with." "I've had 7 years of paying attention," he said. "This is the first 4 hours of conversation." She studied him across the table. The tiredness in his face had not reduced. If anything, it had deepened slightly as the night wore on, the tiredness of someone who did not sleep easily and had accepted this as a permanent feature of their life. The scar along his jaw. The stillness that was not passive. It was the stillness of someone managing something. "You said you kept track of me," she said, "for 7 years. And you said it wasn't obsessive. Help me understand the difference from where you're sitting." He was quiet for a moment. "After the trauma bay, I had my people find out who you were. Standard. I needed to know if you'd talk." A pause. "You didn't. You treated me as a patient, filed a report with the name I'd given you, documented the wound as a possible assault, reported it as required. That was it. You didn't look for me, didn't ask questions after. That was the job. That was character." He shifted slightly in the chair. "So I kept the file, checked it periodically, where you were working, whether you were all right." A beat. "It sounds different than it was. It wasn't surveillance. It was knowing that someone I owed existed and was safe. And when I got engaged to Trenton, I closed the file. Until 6 months ago, when his financial situation put him in contact with my operations, and I opened it again." He looked at her and saw what his life looked like from the inside. She was quiet. "If none of this had happened," she said, "if tonight hadn't happened, would you have ever contacted me?" He seemed to think about this honestly. "I don't know. That's the most honest answer you've given me. I try to be accurate." She did not sleep in the guest wing. She didn't sleep at all. She sat in the chair in the sitting room with the fire burning down, and the lake invisible outside, and the letter from Luca on the table beside her, and she worked through it the way she had always worked through the hardest decisions, not by arguing with herself, but by sitting in the discomfort until it clarified. She was 30 years old. She had left a career she loved for a man who had been categorizing her as a liability. She had no apartment she could return to, no position, a set of personal relationships that Trenton had systematically weakened over 18 months. She had savings. She had her training. She had whatever this was. This strange negotiated situation in a compound on Lake Michigan with a man who frightened most of Chicago and had, as far as she could determine, been watching out for her in some form since the night she treated him as a patient and asked nothing in return. The documents were good. She'd read enough legal language through Trenton's business dealings to know the difference between something written to protect the signing party and something written to exploit them, and these were the former: full exit rights, independent financial clause, no cohabitation requirement in the early phase of the arrangement, her name attached to the foundation structure as equal signatory. It was not a fairy tale. It was a contract, but it was an honest one. She picked up the folder and walked to find Luca. He was in the working room. It was 5:30 in the morning. He was standing at the long table with a coffee that looked long cold, reading something she couldn't see from the doorway. One of the men from earlier was still at a station across the room, but the other had been replaced by a different person. He looked up when she came in. She set the folder on the table between them and placed her hand flat on it. "My conditions," she said. "Tell me." "I keep independent legal counsel, not anyone connected to your operation. My own attorney." "Already in the documents." "I know. I want to say it so there's no ambiguity." She took a breath. "I returned to nursing, not as a showpiece for your foundation, as the medical director, with real hiring authority and real operational control." "Agreed. I'm not kept in this compound. I need freedom of movement, my own residence if I want it. There's a clause for that. I want it stated explicitly. I'll have it rewritten in plain language." She nodded. "And I need to know the real scope of what you do. Not a version, not a surface briefing, the actual scope." She looked at him steadily. "Because if I'm legally tied to you, I need to know what I'm tied to, and I need to make that choice with accurate information." The room was very quiet. The man at the station was very carefully not looking at either of them. Luca looked at her for a long moment. "That's a significant ask," he said. "I know. Some of it would put you in a legally compromised position just from having the information. I'm already in a legally interesting position just from being in this room." She did not break eye contact. "I'm not asking you to expose your operations to a stranger. I'm asking you to trust me with enough of the truth that my consent means something. Because right now I'm signing something that I don't fully understand, and I don't do that." He was still. Then he set down the cold coffee. "Give me 48 hours, he said. "Stay here. Let me show you what's relevant. After that, you decide." She held his gaze. 48 hours. And in that time, he stopped. Something crossed his face. Fast. His phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at it. The change in his expression was small and immediate. The compression of a man receiving news that rearranges the immediate future. "What?" she said. He looked up at her. "Hargrove's lawyer filed a report 3 hours ago, claiming you were taken under duress." He set the phone down. "There's also a story moving to the media. He has a contact at the Tribune who's running a piece tomorrow morning claiming you were abducted by organized crime." Nadia felt the cold settle into the room like a separate presence. "He's not just wounded," she said. "He's moving." "Yes." Luca looked at the man at the station. "Get Martinez on the line and pull every documented communication we have on Hargrove from the last 6 months. All of it." "And the Tribune piece?" "Our legal team issues a statement tonight. Nadia's statement, if she'll give one." He looked at her. She thought about Trenton in the snow outside the gate, watching. She thought about the dinner, the 30 faces, the particular pleasure on his mother's face when she announced Caroline Whitfield's name. She thought about the document on the table and the 48 hours and the life she'd been slowly disassembling for 3 years without admitting what she was doing. "I'll give a statement," she said. "You understand that once you do, the position is public. You and I are associated, yes." She looked at him. "I understand what I'm doing." Luca nodded once. He was reaching for his phone when the door at the far end of the room opened, and Marco came through it with a look on his face that Nadia had not yet seen from him. Not the controlled stillness of earlier, but something tighter, something that had contracted around a specific piece of information. "Sir?" He stopped at the threshold. "We have a problem." "Hargrove?" "Not Hargrove." Marco looked at Nadia briefly, then back at Luca. "The Tribune piece isn't just a piece. Someone fed them photographs." Interior photographs. He set a tablet on the table. On the screen was a press preview, time-stamped 40 minutes earlier, not yet live. Taken inside this building, from inside the East Corridor. A pause, tight and deliberate. From tonight. Luca did not move. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Someone inside, Nadia said. Luca picked up the tablet, looked at the image, put it down. When he looked up, his face had settled into something she had not yet seen from him. Not anger, not the managed control of earlier. Something slower and colder. The expression of a man who had just had a calculation he trusted prove incorrect in a way that had specific and serious implications. Yes, he said. And in the silence that followed, Nadia understood for the first time that the danger she was standing in was not only outside the gate, it was already inside the walls. Luca picked up the tablet a second time, looked at the photograph on the screen with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who understood that the quality of his response in the next 60 seconds would determine the shape of everything that followed. The image was clear enough. The East Corridor, the stone floor, the recessed lighting at its dimmed setting, two figures partially visible through an open doorway. One of them was recognizably Nadia. The other was Luca himself, in profile, taken from inside. From a position approximately 15 feet down the corridor, angled slightly upward, someone who knew the building, someone who knew where to stand. He set the tablet face down on the table. "Clear the room," he said. The man at the station stood immediately and left without a word. Marco stayed. "Marco? Sir, I need to clear the room." Marco looked at him for one beat longer than protocol allowed. Then he left, pulling the door behind him. Luca and Nadia stood alone in the working room. She waited. She had learned in the past several hours that he processed things differently than most people. Not slower, but deeper, running the information through something internal before it surfaced as action. She watched him stand at the table with his hands flat on it and his eyes on the middle distance, and she did not rush him. "Someone in this building took that photograph tonight," he said. "Between 10 and midnight, based on the corridor lighting. Those are the only hours it was set that low." "Who had access to the East Corridor?" "Everyone in my household staff, my core security team." "Marco." He stopped. "4 personal aides. A woman who handles my correspondence and scheduling, 2 men from the South team who rotated in at 9 o'clock. That's a lot of people." "Yes." He straightened up from the table. "It is." She watched his face. "You have a suspicion." He looked at her. "I have several." "Tell me." "No." He said it without harshness. "Not until I'm certain. Because naming the wrong person in a situation like this..." He stopped. "It causes damage that doesn't repair." She respected that, even if it frustrated her. "The press preview," she said. "The Tribune piece, it's set to go live when?" 6 a.m. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 5:47. 13 minutes. "Can you stop it?" "I can delay it. My legal team can request a hold pending response. Buys us 6 to 12 hours. He was already moving. To the door, opening it, calling out into the corridor for someone whose name she didn't catch. Then back into the room, picking up his phone, dialing without looking at the screen. Nadia stood and thought. The photograph. East Corridor. Tonight. Someone had known the convoy was coming before it arrived, or had reacted fast enough once it did to position themselves and wait. That implied either advanced knowledge or exceptional presence of mind. She thought about Mrs. Alvarez at the Hargrove dinner. They have no idea who they're insulting, said with that particular quality, not just sympathy, but foreknowledge. Had she known the convoy was coming? Had she been told? Had someone at the Hargrove house made a call tonight that wasn't to Trenton? She was still holding that thought when the door opened and Marco came back in. He was holding his own phone. His expression had the quality of a man carrying something he does not want to put down, because putting it down makes it real. "Martinez found the source," he said. Luca lowered his phone. "Tell me." Marco looked at Nadia first, then at Luca. "It's Danny." The name landed in the room and the air changed. Nadia did not know who Danny was, but she knew from Luca's face, from the single, complete stillness that took hold of him. The way all the micro-expressions that had been moving through his features over the past hours simply stopped, that the name meant something that went far beyond a breach of security protocol. "Say that again," Luca said. His voice was very quiet. Martinez pulled the metadata from the photograph. It was uploaded from a device registered to Daniel Corso. The upload point was the East Corridor, timestamp 1142. Marco's voice was flat and careful, the voice of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Danny's phone, to Danny's account, his ID card accessed the East Corridor at 11:39. A pause. And his personal bank account received a wire transfer from an LLC registered in Delaware at 9:15 tonight, 3 hours before he took the photograph. The silence lasted 4 seconds. "Who owns the LLC?" Luca said. "We're tracing, but the registration structure, the layering, it matches the method Hargrove's firm used to move money through 2 of those shell properties." Luca turned away from both of them, walked to the window, stood with his back to the room, looking at the dark lake and the snow and whatever version of the past he was running behind his eyes right now. Nadia looked at Marco. "Who is Daniel Corso?" Marco looked at Luca's back. Luca didn't turn. "He's been with the boss for 11 years, Marco said quietly. "He was with him before the organization was what it is now, before most of this existed." He stopped. "He's not staff, he's—" He stopped again. "Family," Luca said from the window. The word came out flat, drained of the thing it should have contained. Nobody spoke. Nadia understood then that this was not a security breach. This was something that cut through every layer of professional calculation Luca carried and landed somewhere older and more fundamental. 11 years. Before most of this existed. The kind of loyalty that forms in conditions of genuine danger, the kind that feels permanent because it has survived things that should have broken it, and had apparently been for sale for long enough that someone had found the price. Luca turned around. His face was composed, completely, frighteningly so. The composure of someone who has felt something devastating and has set it aside because the situation requires them to function, and they know how to do that, have always known how to do that, have built an entire life around that skill. "Where is he now?" he said. "His quarters. South Wing." "Is he still on property?" "As of 8 minutes ago, yes. Keep it that way." He moved away from the window. "Get Martinez and have him pull every communication Corso sent or received in the last 30 days. Every channel." A pause. "And find out what Hargrove's LLC paid him for, because a photograph isn't worth that kind of transfer. That's a payment for something larger." Marco nodded and left again. Luca stood in the center of the room. Nadia watched him. She could see the cost of the composure now, could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands weren't entirely still at his sides, not shaking, just not still. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. Something flickered. "Don't be." His voice was rough at the edges in a way it hadn't been before. "This has nothing to do with tonight. This has been building for a while, and I didn't see it, and that's on me." He pulled a chair out and sat down heavily, not dramatically, just like someone who had been standing for a long time and had briefly run out of the specific energy that standing requires. She sat across from him. "What did Hargrove buy?" she said. "I don't know yet. What could Corso give him that's worth that kind of payment?" Luca looked at the table. Operational detail, access points, security rotation schedules. He paused. "Or something older, something from before we built the infrastructure we have now, when there were fewer layers." He was quiet for a moment. "When things were handled in ways that I wouldn't handle them today." She heard what he wasn't saying. "Evidence," she said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "Hargrove's LLC paid Corso for documentation," she said carefully. "Something that predates your legitimate structure, something that—" She stopped. "Something that could be handed to federal investigators." Luca looked at her. "You're fast." "I spent 3 years watching a man build instruments of control and pretend they were gestures of love." She held his gaze. "I learned to read what's under the surface." He nodded. "Once. Slowly. If Hargrove has that documentation," he said, "and he gives it to the right people, or the wrong ones, it doesn't just complicate my legal position. It reopens things that were closed, agreements that were made. A pause. People who cooperated with federal processes on the understanding that certain information would remain contained. Witnesses. People who trusted me. She sat with that. The clock on the wall read 5:59. In 1 minute, the Tribune piece would go live. Depending on what legal hold Luca's team had managed to get, it might not. But that was a pressure valve, not a solution. The photograph was a distraction. The real danger was what Corso had already passed to Hargrove in the days or weeks before tonight. The photograph was just the signal that the exchange had been made, and the other side wanted Luca to know it. It was a provocation. Trenton wasn't just panicking, he had been planning this. He knew about you before tonight, Nadia said. Trenton. He already knew who you were and what you had on him, financially, and he started preparing months ago. Luca looked at her. He didn't go to Corso after he saw the convoy, she said. The payment cleared at 9:15. The convoy arrived at the Hargrove house around 10. He had already made the purchase before he knew I was coming here. She paused. The dinner tonight, the public humiliation, that wasn't just wounded pride. It was a move. He was positioning himself before the counterattack came, making himself look like the victim first. The abduction narrative, the Tribune piece, Corso's photograph, it's all coordinated. She looked at Luca steadily. He set this up before he walked into that dining room. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. This one had weight. He knew I was going to come for you, Luca said, or he knew you were monitoring him financially. And he assumed that if he created a public spectacle around me and your name, it would muddy whatever legal action you were planning. She paused. He's not as stupid as he seems when he's performing. Luca stood up from the chair. The tiredness was still in his face, but it had reorganized itself around something harder now. Martinez. He was already moving toward the door. She followed him. The next 2 hours were the most disorienting of Nadia's adult life, which was a statement with significant competition. Martinez turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s, sharp-faced, with the focused exhaustion of someone who had been awake all night working a problem she had not fully shared yet. She was in a room 2 doors down from the working room, surrounded by screens and a cold cup of coffee and stacks of printed documents that she had been annotating in a handwriting so compressed it was nearly illegible. She looked at Luca when he came in, then at Nadia, then back at Luca. She stays, he said. Martinez accepted this with a small nod and the expression of someone who had opinions and was choosing not to express them. Tell me what Corso gave him, Luca said. Martinez turned to one of the screens. The photograph was cover. You were right about that. The actual transfer, what the payment was for, was a package. Documents, specifically operational records from 2017 and 2018, before the restructure. She turned back to Luca. Communication records, transaction logs, 2 recorded conversations. She paused. One of the conversations includes you directly. Luca's expression did not change. Discussing, he said, the Bellamy situation. The name meant nothing to Nadia, but the effect it produced in the room was immediate and physical. Martinez looked at the table. Marco, who had followed them in, became very still near the doorway, and Luca went somewhere behind his eyes for 2 full seconds before he came back. How did Corso have that recording? He said. He was in the room, Martinez said. He was always in the room. The weight of that sentence was enormous and terrible, and landed on Luca in a way Nadia could see even through the composure, the specific pain of someone understanding that a betrayal was not recent, was not reactive, but was old, was possibly foundational, possibly present in every room they had shared for years. What's the Bellamy situation? Nadia said. Every person in the room looked at her. I'm not asking out of curiosity, she said. I need to know what Hargrove has so I can help you figure out how to fight it. You don't need to fight it, Luca said. You asked me to trust you with 48 hours, she said. Give me the same thing. Luca looked at her for a long moment, then at Martinez. Martinez looked at him. He gave a small nod. In 2017, Martinez said carefully, there was a federal informant embedded in one of the peripheral operations. His name was Bellamy. He was identified. She stopped. The situation was handled in a way that would not survive public or legal scrutiny. The federal investigation it was part of was closed 18 months later through a separate legal process. The Bellamy matter was considered closed. Considered, Nadia said. The recording Corso provided to Hargrove documents a conversation about how it would be handled, before it was handled. Martinez's voice was absolutely flat. It's not evidence of the act, but in the right hands, with the right investigator, it's enough to reopen the inquiry. Nadia sat with this. She looked at Luca. He was looking back at her. Not performing anything, not managing it, just looking at her with the specific quality of someone who has decided to let another person see the full weight of something and is waiting to find out what they do with it. "The 48 hours," she said. "Was this what you were going to show me?" "Part of it." "Were you going to tell me about Bellamy specifically?" A pause. "Yes." "When?" "When I had a better answer about what it meant for your exposure." His voice was steady. "Because if you sign those documents and this surface, you are legally adjacent to something that could be interpreted in ways that damage you." She breathed out through her nose. "So you were protecting me?" "I was buying time to figure out how to protect you and be honest simultaneously." He paused. "I was going to tell you. I wasn't going to let you sign anything without knowing." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because everything else he'd said tonight had been verifiably honest, even when honesty cost him something. Maybe because the kind of lie that requires this much coordination would have been easier to construct and he hadn't bothered. She looked at Martinez. "Hargrove has the recording. What's his play?" "He hasn't moved it yet," Martinez said. "It's still contained on the device Corso transferred it to, but he has it, and he knows he has it, and now Luca knows he has it. So it's leverage," Nadia said. "He's not planning to hand it to investigators. Not yet. He's planning to use it to force Luca to back off the financial exposure." She paused. "Back off me." "Let me go. Let the abduction narrative play out. Let the engagement announcement stand undisturbed." She looked at Luca. "He wants you to disappear and let him reclaim the version of tonight where he was the wronged party." Luca looked at Martinez. Something passed between them. "That's our read," Martinez said quietly. "But there's a problem with his plan," Nadia said. "He doesn't know about the filing. Your attorneys are filing the financial irregularities at 9 a.m., regardless of what he does with the recording." She looked at Luca. "He thinks he has time. He thinks the leverage gives him space to negotiate. He doesn't know the clock already ran out." "Correct," Luca said. "He doesn't know yet. When he finds out, when the filing goes public, he has two choices. He either hands the recording to investigators as retaliation, which exposes him as someone who was in possession of potentially material evidence and sat on it for leverage purposes, or he destroys it, which loses him his only protection." She paused. "Either way, he loses." Luca looked at her. "Unless," she said, "he moves before 9. The clock on the wall read 7:43. 1 hour and 17 minutes. The room became a different kind of quiet. "Where is Corso now?" Luca said. Marco checked his phone. His face did something. "Sir? Where is he?" "He's gone." Marco looked up. "Slipped the south wing in the last 20 minutes. His car is gone from the garage. A pause. "He took one of the backup drives from the server room. Biometrics show he accessed it at 7:31. Nadia felt the ground shift. Luca went completely still. "What was on that drive?" he said. Martinez was already at her keyboard. Her fingers moved fast and then stopped. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her face had gone a specific color. "Current operational structure," she said. "Security rotations. Financial routing through the legitimate subsidiaries." She paused. "And the identities of 6 people currently under federal cooperation agreements." Nobody moved. "He didn't just sell Hargrove a weapon," Marco said quietly from the doorway. "He sold him the whole arsenal." Nadia stood in the middle of the room and felt the shape of the next hours assembling themselves in front of her with the specific cold clarity she had learned to rely on in emergency medicine. The moment when everything chaotic contracts into a single operative question. Not how did this happen? Not what does this mean? Not who is to blame? Just what needs to happen in the next 60 seconds to keep people alive? "The 6 people under cooperation agreements," she said. "If Hargrove has their identities and he gives them to anyone, they're in immediate danger," Luca said. His voice was stripped down to its functional core. "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. For a moment, in the 7:45 morning light coming gray and cold through the windows, She saw him without any of the management or the restraint or the architecture of control he had been maintaining all night. Just a man standing in the middle of something that had cracked wide open, responsible for people whose safety depended on a structure that someone he had trusted for 11 years had just handed to his enemy. "Call your attorneys," she said. "Accelerate the filing. Don't wait for 9. File now, whatever the hour, whatever the cost." She turned to Martinez. "Can you identify where Corso is going? Track the car?" "Already running," Martinez said. "Good." She looked at Luca. "And I need a phone. My own, not a line connected to your system." She paused. "Because I'm going to call Trenton Hargrove." Luca's expression sharpened. "Nadia." "He wants me," she said. "That's still the center of this. Everything he's built tonight is a structure to get me back under his control so he can rewrite what happened. If I call him, I buy you time." She held his gaze. "And I find out what he actually has and what he's planning to do with it." I know what it is," she said. "Do you have a better option in the next 70 minutes? He looked at her for a long moment, then he turned to Marco. "Get her a clean phone." Marco left. Nadia stood in the gray morning light and breathed slowly in and out and told herself what she had always told herself in the worst moments of the trauma bay, when the situation had outrun every protocol and the only thing left was whatever she actually was when everything else was stripped away. "You know what you're doing. Do it." The clean phone arrived in Marco's hand. She took it. And somewhere across Chicago, in whatever space Trenton Hargrove had retreated to after his convoy left the gate, a man who had spent months building a weapon was about to find out that the person he'd aimed it at had stopped running and turned to face him, and had brought something he hadn't prepared for. Not fear, not compliance. The particular cold-eyed clarity of a woman who had finally, completely, and without reservation, the phone rang 4 times before he picked up. She had expected him to let it go to voicemail. She had prepared for that, had prepared the exact words she would leave, the tone, the specific calibration of vulnerability and need that she knew, from 3 years of study, would compel him to call back within minutes. Because Trenton Hargrove could not leave a version of the story uncontrolled, could not let a message from her sit unanswered while he didn't know what it contained, but he picked up. "Nadia." His voice was tight. Not the performance from the dinner, the real thing underneath it, wound to a frequency she recognized. He was scared and trying to sound like he wasn't, which meant he was more scared than he wanted to admit even to himself. "I need to talk to you," she said. A pause. "You left with his people." "I know. You got in his car." "I know what I did, Trenton." "Then you understand." "I understand that you're in a situation you don't fully control and that you're doing what you always do when that happens. You're building a story." She kept her voice even, not warm, not cold, surgical. "The Tribune piece, the welfare report, the convoy to the gate, you're building a version of tonight that makes you the reasonable party." She paused. "I'm calling because that version doesn't work if I'm not in it the way you need me to be." Silence. She could hear him breathing. "Come back," he said. "To what?" "To—" He stopped, started again. "We can handle this privately. Whatever he told you, whatever he showed you, Nadia, you don't know what he is. I know exactly what he is. Then you know you're in danger." "I'm calling you from his house," she said, voluntarily, "with a clean phone he gave me. If I were in danger, I wouldn't be making this call." Another silence. Longer. She could hear him thinking, could almost feel the calculation moving through the line, the way he was adjusting his model of the situation based on new data and not liking what the adjusted model showed him. "What do you want?" he said. "I want to know what you're actually planning to do with what Corso gave you." The pause that followed had a different quality. Denser. She had named something he hadn't expected her to know, and the gap between what he'd assumed she knew and what she actually knew had just collapsed, and he needed a moment to rebuild his footing. "I don't know what you're—" "Danny Corso," she said. "The drive. The recording from 2017. The 6 names." She let that sit for one beat. "I know what you have. I want to know what you're planning to do with it." The line was quiet for so long she thought he might have hung up. Then, "How long have you known about Moretti?" "Long enough." "That's not—" "Trenton." Her voice sharpened slightly. You have approximately 40 minutes before Luca's attorneys file the financial disclosure that ends your company, your engagement to Caroline Whitfield, and your ability to represent yourself as a viable business partner to anyone in this city. She paused. What you do in those 40 minutes determines what the next 10 years of your life look like. So I'm asking you one more time. What are you planning to do with what Corso gave you? Silence. Then she heard something shift in his voice, the performance dropping away entirely, replaced by something rawer and more dangerous, the sound of a man who has been afraid for a long time and has finally stopped pretending he isn't. I'm planning to make sure he can't file anything, Trenton said. I'm planning to make sure that if he does, he spends the next decade in federal court instead of destroying my company. I have enough to bury him, Nadia. What Corso gave me, that recording alone is enough to reopen a federal case that puts Moretti away for a long time. His breathing was audible now. And if you're there, if you're associated with him when that happens, is that a threat? It's a fact. No. She stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in, pacing now, because she could not have this conversation sitting still. A fact is that you've had material evidence of potential criminal activity in your possession for several hours, and you haven't reported it. That makes you legally complicit in whatever happened after you received it. She stopped pacing. A fact is that you commissioned the theft of that evidence through a payment to a third party, which makes you the subject of a criminal conspiracy charge before you've done anything with it. She kept her voice level, but only barely. You built a weapon, and you've been holding it so long you forgot which end you're pointing. Don't lecture me. I'm not lecturing you. I'm telling you that I am standing in a room with the man you're trying to threaten, and his legal team is sitting 40 feet from me, and in 38 minutes, they're going to file documents that make everything you've accumulated tonight worthless. Because the financial exposure will be public record, and you cannot leverage a secret that isn't a secret anymore. A long, ragged exhale on the other end of the line. Come back, he said again. Quieter. Something had gone out of it. No. Nadia? No, Trenton. And here, for the first time in the call, she let something real come through. Not manipulation, not strategy, just the stripped-down truth of a woman who had spent 3 years smaller than she actually was and was done with it. I'm not coming back. Not tonight. Not ever. And every move you're making right now, every piece of this structure you've built, it's built around the assumption that I will, that I need you to, that I'm still the person who sat at the end of your table and let your family take pieces of her because she was afraid of what happened if she didn't. She stopped. That person is gone. You ended her tonight at that dinner. Congratulations. Now you're dealing with whoever's left. She ended the call. Luca was standing in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been there. She didn't ask. She set the phone on the table. Her hand was steady. She was surprised by that. He's going to move, she said. Not through investigators. Not yet. He's going to try something direct first because he can't stand losing the narrative to a legal process. He needs a visible win or a visible destruction. She looked at Luca. He's going to come here. Luca didn't look surprised. He looked like a man confirming something he'd already calculated. I know, he said. How many people does he have? Hargrove's personal security is 6. He's been in contact with a private firm since last night. We picked up the communication. The firm runs 12 operators. He paused. He's not military. He's not organized crime. He's a desperate man with money who has convinced himself that an aggressive enough show of force can fix what money and narrative couldn't. He's wrong. Yes. Luca turned back into the corridor. But wrong and armed is still dangerous. The next 30 minutes moved the way the worst trauma scenarios moved, in a compressed, hyper-detailed rush, where every second had more information in it than a second should reasonably contain, and the body ran on adrenaline it would spend the next week paying back. Martinez located Corso 20 minutes after the phone call. He was at a parking structure on Lower Walker Drive, meeting with 2 men she identified through traffic camera footage as employees of the private security firm Hargrove had contacted. The backup drive had been transferred. Whatever was on it was now in the hands of people who worked for Trenton Hargrove. The 6 names on that drive, Nadia said to Luca, standing in the working room while Martinez typed and Marco coordinated on a separate line. They need to be warned, right now, before any of this goes further. My people are already... Right now, she repeated. Not when the situation stabilizes. Right now, before Hargrove's people have time to move on the information. She held his gaze. If something happens to one of those people because we waited 20 minutes, that's not a tactical error. That's a person. Luca looked at her for 1 second. Then he looked at Marco. Get all 6 on secure lines. Now. Move them if they'll agree to it. Marco was already on the phone. Luca looked back at Nadia. Something in his face had shifted from the careful managed quality of earlier into something more direct, more unguarded. The exhaustion was there, and underneath it, something she didn't have a precise name for. The particular expression of someone realizing, in real time, that they've been operating alone for so long, they've forgotten what it feels like to have someone thinking alongside them. She didn't comment on it. There wasn't time. The filing, she said. Where are we? Attorneys are accelerating. 20 minutes. Good. She looked at the monitors. The gate feed showed nothing unusual yet. The perimeter was quiet. The snow had slowed to intermittent flurries, the sky beginning to shift from black to the flat gray of a Chicago winter dawn. He'll come from the North Road. It's the approach that's hardest to observe from the public road, and he'll have been told that by someone who knows the property layout. Corso, Luca said. Yes. Our people are already repositioning. She looked at him. You've been running 2 tracks this whole time. I've been running 3, he said simply. Yours was the one I wasn't certain about. She absorbed that. What was the third? Damage containment for the Bellamy matter, in case Hargrove actually moves the recording to investigators. He sat down at the table. Not the exhausted collapse of earlier, but something more deliberate. The posture of a man settling into the final portion of something. There are 2 attorneys who know the full context, who can make an argument for the circumstances. It's not a clean situation, but it's not indefensible either. You've had that prepared for 3 years. A pause. You prepare for the worst outcome so you're not paralyzed when it arrives. Nadia sat across from him. The morning light was strengthening outside, cold and gray, and in it she could see the last several hours written on his face. The 11-year friendship that had turned out to be something else. The drives with other people's names on them, the specific weight of having built something and finding a structural flaw in its foundation the night you most needed it to hold. You trusted him, she said. I trusted the version of him I thought I knew. He looked at the table. That's not the same thing. I know that now. You couldn't have. I could have, he said. I missed things. I saw what I wanted to see because it was easier, because he'd been there from the beginning, and that felt like it meant something permanent. His voice was flat, but not without feeling. It had the flatness of feeling compressed by force of will rather than the absence of it. It doesn't. Things aren't permanent because they're old. They're only what they are right now. She thought about Trenton, about 3 years of small negotiations with herself, about the precise mental architecture of willfully not seeing. Yeah, she said. I know. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the lake was becoming visible as the sky lightened. The enormous dark surface of it, restless under the low cloud, indifferent to everything happening on the shore. Then Marco appeared in the doorway. His face was the face of bad news arriving faster than expected. They're at the north tree line, he said, on foot. They left the vehicles half a mile back on the service road. He looked at Luca. 12 operators. Hargrove's 6 personal security, and he stopped. Hargrove is with them. He came himself, Nadia said. Yes, ma'am. She looked at Luca. He was already on his feet. Stay inside the main building, he said to her. You said that before. Nadia, I have medical training and I know this property better than I did 2 hours ago. She stood. You are not leaving me in a room while people get hurt because of me. This isn't because of you. It started because of me. She held his gaze, and something in the directness of it, the refusal to be managed, to be placed somewhere safe and convenient while the situation resolved itself around her, made him stop. I'm not a liability. I'm a resource. Use me correctly or don't, but I'm not sitting in that room. 3 full seconds. East Wing, he said finally. There's a medical kit in the storage room off the kitchen. If anyone comes back hurt, you're there. He looked at her with something that was not quite a plea and not quite an order. Not the perimeter, not the north side. East Wing, she said. Agreed. He held her gaze for one more beat. Then he turned and moved, and the room shifted into the kind of controlled, purposeful chaos that happens when people who know what they're doing begin doing it under pressure. Bam. She found the medical kit exactly where he said it would be. She pulled it onto the kitchen island and opened it and took a fast inventory the way she had taken inventory 1,000 times in triage. What's here? What's missing? What can substitute? The kit was well stocked. Better than well stocked. She restocked the accessible materials in order of priority and told herself to breathe. Outside, she could hear movement, the coordinated positioning of Luca's security team, the low transmission of communication through earpieces, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Then, from the north side, something that might have been a voice carried by the wind. Then silence. Then, very clearly, breaking glass somewhere above her. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall. Second floor, east side, the room directly above her. She heard footsteps. Not Luca's people. Wrong cadence, heavier, less disciplined. The footsteps of someone moving fast but not trained to move quietly. Someone who had come in through a window on the second floor east side, which meant someone who knew exactly which window had the weakest sensor coverage. Corso had given them a map. She grabbed the medical kit handle, looked at the kitchen doorway, and made a decision in the time it took to breathe once. She did not run. She positioned herself behind the kitchen island with clear sightlines to both doorways, and she picked up the heaviest implement within reach, a cast iron skillet hanging from a rack above the island, and she held it. And she waited, because she was a trauma nurse who had worked 2 years in a hospital ER in a neighborhood where violence arrived at the door regularly, and she knew the difference between a threat that required flight and a threat that required stillness. The footsteps reached the staircase, started coming down. She breathed. One person. The gate was off, slightly uneven, favoring the left side, which meant either an injury or carrying something heavy on the right. The sound of something metallic against the staircase wall as they descended. The door at the base of the stairs opened. The man who came through it was not one of Hargrove's contracted operators. He was too young, too uncertain in his posture, moving with the specific quality of someone who had agreed to something in the abstract and was now confronting it in the concrete. He had a weapon drawn, but held low, not raised. Not ready to use it, ready to have it. He saw Nadia. He stopped. She held the skillet and looked at him. "You're not going to shoot me," she said. Her voice came out steady. "You don't want to. You came in through a window because someone told you the east wing was clear and low risk, and you expected to move through a building and come out the other side, and instead you're in a kitchen with a woman who is not afraid of you." She kept her eyes on his. "Put the weapon down." He stared at her. "Your hands are shaking," she said. "I can see it from here. That means you're not a killer. That means you're someone who took a job that turned into something different than the job description. And you're standing in a kitchen in a compound that belongs to Luca Moretti trying to figure out how the next 30 seconds of your life go." She didn't move. "Put it down." The weapon lowered another inch. Then two things happened at the same time. The door on the other side of the kitchen opened, and Marco came through it at speed, took in the situation in less than a second, and moved to cover the young man before he had time to recalibrate. And from outside, from the north side of the compound, a sound she felt more than heard, a concussive report that shook the windows in their frames and sent a ripple through the floor under her feet. Not gunfire, something larger. She looked at Marco. His earpiece crackled. His face did the thing faces do when the information arriving is worse than the information expected. "What happened?" she said. "North approach." His voice was tight. "Hargrove's people breached the outer wall. Luca's—" He stopped. The earpiece again. "Luca's at the north gate. There's a situation." She was already moving. "East wing," Marco said sharply. "You said—" "I lied," she said, and went through the door. The north grounds were a different world from the inside of the building. Open, exposed, the flat gray dawn light stripping away any softness. The lake a dark mass beyond the compound wall. The snow on the ground churned and marked by boots in multiple directions. She could hear voices, controlled, communicating, and somewhere ahead, past the secondary gate structure, something burning. A vehicle. One of Hargrove's cars had made it through the outer approach, and was now stopped and on fire 30 yards from the north gate, which meant someone had stopped it with enough force to ignite it, which meant the outer defense had held, but the cost of holding it was written in the burning wreckage. She moved along the east wall, keeping to the shadow of it, the medical kit in her left hand. The wind off the lake cut through her coat like it had a purpose. She heard Luca before she saw him. His voice, in the dark between two sections of the outer wall structure, giving clipped instructions to two people she couldn't see. And something in the cadence of it was different, a roughness she recognized from the trauma bay, from patients who were managing pain and trying not to let it manage them back. She came around the corner of the wall. He was standing upright. That was the first thing she assessed. Upright, weight distributed evenly, no compensatory posture that indicated lower body injury, but his left hand was pressed against his right side, and in the dawn light she could see dark staining on the fabric of his jacket beneath the hand. He looked up and saw her. "I told you," he started. "Shut up," she said, moving to him. "Let me see." "It's not—" "Let me see, Luca." He moved his hand. The cut was deep. Not a bullet wound, something jagged, probably from the debris of whatever had breached the outer approach. 4 inches across the right side, bleeding steadily but not arterially. Painful. Significant. Not immediately life-threatening if she dealt with it in the next several minutes. She opened the kit. "The situation," she said while her hands moved. "Tell me." Hargrove's operators are contained in the north quadrant. 3 of them are down, non-lethal. The rest have stopped moving. He hissed slightly as she applied pressure. His personal security broke and ran when the perimeter response went active. They weren't prepared for organized defense. A pause, ragged at the edges. Hargrove himself. Where? He made it to the secondary gate. He's inside the compound. She looked up from the wound. He's inside. Yes. With the drive. He won't have it on him. Corso already transferred the data. He watched her hands work with an expression she recognized. The specific look of someone surprised to be cared for competently in conditions that didn't invite it. Nadia. Don't move. She was taping the pressure dressing. Nadia, look at me. She looked up. His face in the gray dawn light, with the blood on his jacket and the exhaustion and the thing he'd been carrying all night finally visible at the surface, not managed, not performed, just present, said something that he did not put into words because he was not a man who put such things into words easily, and also because there was not time. But she heard it. She finished the dressing, pressed her palm flat against it for 3 seconds. Hold that, she said. She stood up. 40 feet away, through the secondary gate, she could see a figure emerging from the shadow of the inner wall structure, moving in the erratic, over-adrenalized way of someone who had run further on panic than preparation and was now arriving at the end of both. Expensive coat, no weapon visible. Moving toward them with the expression of a man who had burned everything down and was standing in the ash and still believed somehow that he could negotiate what came next. Trenton Hargrove. He saw Nadia first. Then he saw Luca behind her, upright, bloodied, looking at him with an expression that had no performance in it at all. Trenton stopped. He was breathing hard. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His hair, always precise, was wrecked by the wind and the run. He looked like what he was, a man who had constructed a version of himself out of money and image and the compliance of people around him, standing in a moment where none of those resources was available, looking at the 2 people he had underestimated most catastrophically. It's over, Nadia said. You don't, he was gasping slightly. You don't understand what I have, what I can still... The drive, Luca said from behind her. His voice was level, absolute. Is it worth what it costs you to use it? Trenton looked at him, then back at Nadia, and she watched something happen in his face. A long, slow, structural failure. The kind that happens when a person has been holding a version of reality together through pure force of will, and the will finally gives out, and the version collapses, and what's left is just a man standing in the cold with no coat on one shoulder and no plan left that Trenton stood in the gray morning with no plan left that could save him. That was the truth of him, stripped of everything else. The coat torn at the shoulder, the breathing still ragged from the run, the eyes moving between Nadia and Luca with the rapid, recalculating quality of a man who has spent his entire adult life finding the angle in every situation, and has finally arrived at one that doesn't have one. Nobody moved for a long moment. The wind came off the lake and pushed across the compound grounds, and lifted snow dust off the churned surface, and took it nowhere in particular. Somewhere behind the outer wall, one of the burning vehicles popped and settled. The sound was flat and final in the cold air. "The drive," Nadia said. "Where is it?" Trenton looked at her. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Corso has a copy," Luca said from behind her. His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort in it, the breath control of someone managing pain and not letting it show in the words. "Whatever's on Hargrove's drive is already duplicated. Destroying it changes nothing." "I know," she said. She kept her eyes on Trenton. "I'm asking because I want him to say it. I want him to stand here and account for what he did." Trenton's jaw tightened. "You want me to? You paid a man 11 years of someone's trust." Her voice was even, not loud. "You found a price for something that should not have had a price, and you paid it. And then you built a weapon out of it and pointed it at people whose names you don't even know." She stepped forward. One step, just enough. "Say what you did." He stared at her. "Nadia." His voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "I was losing everything." "I know. The company, the reputation, all of it. You have to understand, when it started collapsing, you needed someone to blame." She stopped 3 feet from him. "And I was available. I was right there. I'd already made myself smaller than I was so you'd be comfortable, and that made me the right size to stand in front of when things fell apart." She paused. The dinner wasn't about ending an engagement. It was about establishing a version of events before Moretti's attorneys made your financial fraud public. You needed me humiliated on the record before you became the story. You needed witnesses who would remember you as the wronged party. She watched his face. "Tell me I'm wrong." He said nothing. "Tell me I'm wrong, Trenton." His eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm not," she said. Behind her, she heard Luca shift, a small sound, the adjustment of a man managing a wound while standing, and she turned to look at him. His hand was still pressed to his side. The dressing sheet applied was holding, but his face had gone a shade paler in the growing morning light. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Sit down." He looked at her with an expression that was almost, not quite, amusement. A man who was accustomed to being the one who stayed upright while everything else fell and was encountering, perhaps for the first time, someone who would not allow that to be a performance. He sat on the low stone ledge of the secondary gate wall. She turned back to Trenton. Marco had appeared at the edge of the scene with 2 of Luca's security team. They were present but not moving in, waiting. "The drive," she said again. "Where is it?" "In her pocket," Trenton said quietly. All the shape had gone out of his voice. "Left side." "Give it to Marco." He reached into his coat, produced a small device, a drive the size of a thumb, in a case she recognized as standard encrypted backup. He held it out. Marco came forward and took it without a word. Trenton stood with his arms still extended for a moment after it was gone. Then he lowered it slowly. He looked older than he had at the dinner. The snow had dampened his hair and the wind had done the rest. And without the architecture of his social environment, the table, the guests, the performance, he was just a man in an expensive coat who had tried to burn down a world to avoid admitting he'd broken it, and had failed. "What happens now?" he said. "Luca's attorneys filed 40 minutes ago," she said. "The financial disclosure is public record. The Whitfield engagement will be terminated once Gerald Whitfield's people see it, which I estimate is somewhere between 3 and 5 hours from now." She paused. "Federal investigators will have the filing by this afternoon. The fraud charges will follow the timeline of their process, which you don't control." She looked at him steadily. "You should call an attorney, a real one, not one of your father's firm, someone independent who can actually help you navigate what's coming." He stared at her. "That's it? You're telling me to get a lawyer. What did you want?" "I don't know." His voice was rough, genuinely lost. I don't know what I thought." "You thought I'd fight with you," she said, "or beg, or negotiate." She shook her head slightly. I'm done negotiating with you, Trenton. I was done 3 hours ago when I got in that car. She stepped back. You're not the most important thing that happened tonight. You're what started it. Something moved across his face. Grief, maybe. The particular grief of a man understanding in real time that the person he most wanted to wound has moved somewhere he cannot reach her. He looked at Luca. Luca was watching him from the wall with the composed, patient expression of someone who has already decided how this ends and is simply waiting for the other person to arrive at the same conclusion. I had your man for 11 years, Trenton said. It came out with a bitterness that was the last armed thing about him. You had his greed for however long it took you to find it, Luca said. That's not the same as having him. A pause. And it cost you more than it cost me. Trenton had nothing left for that. Marco spoke quietly to the two security men. They moved to either side of Trenton, not grabbing him, not threatening, simply present. An escort and an end to the conversation. Federal agents are on their way, Marco said. Not to Trenton specifically, to the air, loud enough to be heard. Trenton closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he walked with Marco's people toward the front of the compound, and the morning swallowed him. She went back to Luca. He was still on the wall, which told her something about the actual condition of the wound. A man who sat down because he was told to and then didn't get back up had more going on than he'd admitted. She opened the kit again and crouched in front of him and lifted the edge of the pressure dressing carefully. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped entirely. She needed proper sutures and better light and sterile conditions, none of which were available in a compound courtyard at 6:30 in the morning, but she could manage the immediate situation, and she did, reworking the dressing with the materials she had, her hands moving with the automatic competence of someone who had done this in worse conditions with less. He watched her work. You never froze, he said. What? Tonight. Any of it. The gate, the kitchen, the north grounds. He was quiet for a moment. Most people freeze at some point. I had a bad year in the ER, she said. Every time things go wrong fast, I get quieter. It's a reflex. She pressed the edge of the dressing flat. It's not bravery. It's just how I process. What's the difference? She looked up at him. Bravery is when you're afraid and you do it anyway. I'm not always afraid in the moment. I process it afterward, usually at 3 a.m., usually alone. She paused. That's not better. It just looks better in a crisis. Something in his face shifted. The composed quality of the last several hours had thinned in the cold and the light and the aftermath, and what was under it was more real and more human and more tired than anything she had seen from him. Danny, he said. It was the first time he'd said the name since the working room. She waited. 11 years. He looked at the lake. I keep running it back. Every conversation, every situation where I trusted him with something that mattered, trying to find the moment where I should have seen it. He stopped. I can't find it, and I don't know if that means I was blind or if it means it wasn't there until recently. Does it matter? He looked back at her. Doesn't it? It might matter to you personally, she said carefully, in terms of how you understand what happened, but it doesn't change what he did or what you do about it. And spending the next year looking for the moment you should have known it's just pain that doesn't produce anything. She sat back. I looked for that moment with Trenton for 8 months. I found it eventually. 18 months before the dinner, there was a conversation where I actually knew. And I chose not to know. She paused. It didn't make anything better. It just gave me something to punish myself with. He was quiet. You stop blaming yourself when you accept that the person who betrayed you is the one responsible for the betrayal, she said. Not you for missing it. Not you for trusting. Them, for deciding to be what they turned out to be. She looked at him. You gave Danny Corso a life. He sold pieces of it when someone offered him the right number. That's his answer to who he is, not yours. Luca looked at her for a long time. You should have been terrible, he said finally, given everything Hargrove did. You should have been broken or angry, or you should have been a different person than this. Maybe I am a different person than I was yesterday, she said. I don't have enough distance to know yet. No. He shook his head slightly. This is who you were. He just put enough weight on it that you couldn't access it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, can you walk? Yes. Then let's go inside. You need actual medical care, and I need coffee, and we both need to be somewhere warm when the federal people arrive. He looked at her, the not-quite smile again. You're going to give a statement. I'm going to give a very clear and complete statement, she said, about everything relevant to tonight, which does not include the Bellamy matter because I wasn't there, and I don't know anything about it, and what I don't know I can't be questioned about. She met his eyes. But what I do know, the abduction narrative, Hargrove's coordination with Corso, the drive, the attack on this property tonight, all of that I will say exactly and completely. That puts you on record. I know what it does. She stood and offered him a hand up. I told you, I know what I'm doing. He looked at her hand for a moment. Then he took it and stood. The federal agents arrived at 8:15. 2 vehicles, 4 agents, professional and efficient, and Nadia gave her statement in the main sitting room, the same room where she'd first read Luca's letter, where the fire had burned down to coals. With her own voice level and her own hand still in her lap, in the presence of 2 attorneys she had not met before but who had clearly been briefed, because they intervened twice with the precision of people who knew exactly where the lines were. She told the truth about everything she had direct knowledge of. She was accurate and specific and did not embellish and did not minimize. Trenton had been taken to a federal processing facility. She didn't ask for details about what happened next for him. She had said her piece about Trenton Hargrove in the courtyard in the gray morning light, and there was nothing left in her that needed to revisit it. Corso was apprehended at 11:40 on the expressway headed south, the backup drive still in his possession. The 6 people under cooperation agreements were relocated before 9 a.m. All of them were safe. She found that out from Martinez, who delivered the information with a brevity that still carried the full weight of what it meant. Not a clean outcome, not a simple one, but the kind that leaves everyone standing. She sat in the kitchen afterward with a cup of coffee she had made herself and let the silence of a house winding down from crisis settle around her. The sounds were different now. The measured movement of people returning to routine, the low voices of the security team, the creak of the building in the wind off the lake. Not peaceful exactly, but resolved. The kind of quiet that follows something that is genuinely finished. Luca came in an hour after her. He had changed his shirt. The wound had been properly dressed by someone with more materials than she'd had in the courtyard. He moved with the careful economy of a man with stitches in his side who was not going to let that be a story, and she noted it and didn't comment. He poured himself coffee and sat at the island across from her. They sat in silence for a while. A real one. Not the waiting silences of the night before, not silences charged with calculation or withheld information, but the kind of silence that 2 people can share when they have been through enough together that they don't need to perform being comfortable. Martinez found where Corso had been routing money for the past 7 months, he said eventually. It wasn't just Hargrove, there were 3 other buyers, small items. Nothing individually catastrophic, but the pattern is what matters. Yes. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I have to rebuild some things. The structure, the way I've set up trust within the operation, some of it was built on assumptions that don't hold anymore. That takes time. Yes. A pause. Most things that matter do. She looked at him across the kitchen island. In the daylight, proper daylight now, the flat white winter light coming through the kitchen windows. He looked different than he had in the night. More ordinary in some ways. More visible. The tiredness was still there, but it had relaxed slightly. The acute edge of a crisis state tiredness, settling into something more chronic and familiar. The scar along his jaw. The careful way he was holding his coffee to avoid putting pressure on his right side. The 48 hours, she said. He looked at her. You said give you 48 hours and you'd show me what's relevant. Then I could decide. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I think the last 12 hours covered most of the curriculum. That's one way to look at it. What did I miss? He was quiet for a moment. Nothing that would change what you already know. He looked at the cup. The picture is what it is. I'm not going to be someone different than this. The operation exists. The history exists. The parts of it that aren't clean aren't going to become clean overnight. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or hasn't looked carefully. He paused. What I can tell you is the direction. And that it's been the same direction for 12 years. Slower than I wanted, more complicated than I planned for, but consistent. Ndachai Pechi.
I believe that, she said. He looked up. I don't know that I should, she said. I can't verify it independently. But I watched you tonight make every decision in the direction of protecting people rather than protecting the structure. When you had to choose between the 6 names on that drive and the operational security, you didn't hesitate. She paused. That's character. That's not a strategy. He held her gaze. The documents, she said, are they still valid? After tonight, after the federal presence, after everything, is the structure you propose still legally sound? My attorneys will review. There may be modifications needed. A pause. But the foundation stands. My conditions stand too. I know. Independent counsel. Medical directorship with real authority. Freedom of movement. She looked at him. And the honest briefing, which I've now partially received under extreme circumstances, but I still want it completed properly, in a room without a crisis in the next room. Agreed. She nodded slowly. Outside, the lake was visible in the winter light, enormous and gray and restless, the surface of it broken by the wind into thousands of small facets that caught the light differently from every angle. She had grown up in a neighborhood where the lake was a presence you felt at the edge of everything, but rarely approached directly. And sitting here, with it filling the window, she felt the scale of the last 24 hours against the scale of that water, and found, surprisingly, that the comparison steadied her rather than diminishing her. I want to go back to the neighborhood, she said. Humboldt Park. That's where I want to build the clinic. Not somewhere sanitized, not somewhere that photographs well for a foundation brochure. Where people actually need it. Luca looked at her. All right. I need to hire staff, real staff, people with actual qualifications who will be paid properly and whose hiring will have nothing to do with your operation. You have full authority. I need to find somewhere to live. Not here. She paused. Not yet. I need my own space first. I'll have properties available. My choice, she said. I'll find it myself. You can cover the security considerations, but I picked the place. Fair. She looked at him. You're very agreeable this morning, she said, the not quite smile again. You saved my life twice now. First on a trauma table 7 years ago. Second when you called Hargrove and bought us the time we needed. He paused. I'm trying to do better than agreeable. I'm trying to be honest about what that's worth. She looked at him for a long moment. You should sleep, she said. I should. You're not going to. Probably not. Then at least eat something. She stood and opened the refrigerator and looked at its contents with the practical assessment of someone who had spent years making functional decisions with whatever was available, and began to do what needed doing next, which was the only thing that had ever gotten her through anything. He watched her move around the kitchen. Something in his face had gone quiet in a way she was beginning to recognize, not the managed composure of the night, not the focused control of a man running a crisis, but the particular quietness of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and is sitting in a moment where that doesn't seem to be the only option anymore. She put a pan on the stove. The servant at the Hargrove house, she said. Mrs. Alvarez, she knew the convoy was coming. She knew who sent it. She didn't look away from the stove. She's been passing you information. A pause. She's been working for the Hargroves for 22 years, Luca said carefully. She came to me 8 months ago, voluntarily. She'd seen things she couldn't stay quiet about. What things? The way he spoke to you when no one else was there, Luca said. She described specific incidents, twice involving her directly. Times he instructed her to relay messages that were designed to undermine you, make you doubt your own memory of conversations. A pause. She was angry. She said she'd been angry for a long time, and she'd finally decided to do something useful with it. Nadia stood at the stove and let that settle. Is she all right? After tonight, she was still in that house when she left before the filing went public. She has family in Florida. She'll be fine. A beat. She asked me to tell you she was sorry she didn't say more at the door. Nadia thought about the woman's hand on her wrist, the weight of what had been in her voice. They have no idea who they're insulting. Tell her she said enough, Nadia said. Listen. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, reluctantly with frequent setbacks, the city insisting on 2 more weeks of cold after every tentative warm day.
as if the winter wasn't willing to be dismissed without making its exit expensive. The clinic opened in April. It was a converted two-story building on North Kedzie, formerly a dental office and before that a hardware store. And the renovation had taken 11 weeks of work that Nadia had been involved in from framing to finish, not because she needed to be, but because she had learned at some cost that things built with your own hands have a structural integrity that things built at a distance often lack. She had hired 7 staff members, a physician, 2 nurse practitioners, 3 medical assistants, a patient coordinator, and had fought with Luca's foundation attorneys for 3 weeks over the directorship agreement until it said exactly what she wanted it to say and not one word more. The opening was not an event. No ribbon, no press, no catered reception. She unlocked the door at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday in April and saw the first patient at 8:23. A 54-year-old man named Gerald, who hadn't been to a doctor in 4 years because of what that cost, who sat in the chair in the first examination room with the cautious dignity of someone who wasn't sure yet whether this was the kind of place that would treat him like a person. And in the 40 minutes she spent with Gerald, everything from the last 4 months receded to exactly the right distance. Not gone, not resolved into simplicity, just correctly proportioned. The Hargrove name disappeared from Chicago society over the course of 6 weeks. Not dramatically. The collapse was thorough enough that it didn't need drama. The fraud charges were filed in late February. The Whitfield engagement dissolved within hours of Gerald Whitfield's attorneys reviewing the financial disclosure, which was exactly the timeline she had estimated in Luca's kitchen at dawn. The Hargrove family's social orbit contracted rapidly and then essentially ceased, the way all orbits cease when the gravity at the center collapses. Claudette Hargrove's name appeared in the Tribune once more, in a small item about the sale of the North Shore mansion. It was not an article anyone lingered over. Brinley Hargrove had apparently called the family's crisis PR firm within hours of the disclosure going public. Nadia knew this because someone told her and she filed it under information that was not relevant to anything she was building and moved on. Trenton's attorneys entered a plea agreement in late March. She heard about it through her own attorney, who had flagged it as information she should have but didn't need to respond to. She read the summary, set it down, did not think about it much after. Corso was charged separately, and the proceedings were more complicated and would take longer, and that was not a timeline she tracked. On a Saturday in May, Luca came to the clinic. She had not been expecting him. He had seen the building once during renovation, had come by without calling ahead, had walked through the rooms with her without comment, asking questions about how she'd laid out the patient flow with the specific interest of a man who had spent his life thinking about how space communicates either safety or threat. And she had answered them, and they had stood in the unfinished second-floor consultation room and looked out at North Kedzie, and she had told him what she was building, specifically and concretely, and he had listened in the way that he listened to things that mattered, with his full attention and without filling the available silence with his own response. But that had been in March. This was May, and the clinic was open, and he came in through the front door on a Saturday morning and sat in the waiting area while she finished with a patient and her coordinator, who had been briefed to maintain complete professional discretion about all donors and board members, brought him coffee, and treated him exactly like everyone else, which Nadia had specifically required. She came out and saw him in the chair, big coat, no tie, the careful posture of a man whose side had healed but who still had the memory of the injury and how he held himself. And something moved through her that was neither professional nor complicated, just honest, the kind of feeling that has been building for long enough that it stopped being a surprise and started being a fact. "You should have called," she said. "I was in the neighborhood." "You are never just in the neighborhood." The not-quite smile. "How's it going?" "Good." She sat in the chair beside him. "Really good, actually." She paused. "Gerald came back last week. Second visit. He brought his brother." Luca looked at her. "Gerald." "First patient." She paused. "He told the coordinator he'd told 3 people from his building about us. 2 of them have already scheduled." She looked at her hands. "That's how it works. That's the only way it works. Not press events. Not ribbon cuttings. Someone tells someone they were treated like a person, and it spreads from there." He was quiet for a moment. "I read the quarterly report." "I know, I wrote it." You wrote it like someone who expected to be questioned on every line.
I did expect that.
The numbers are good. The numbers are honest, she said, which sometimes means they're not impressive. We're small. We'll be small for a while before we're not. She looked at him. That's all right. He nodded. They sat in the waiting room of a clinic on North Kedzie on a Saturday morning in May. And through the front window, the street was doing what Chicago streets do in the first real warmth of spring, coming back to life, slowly and without certainty but genuinely, people moving with a looseness that had been absent for months. The city recovering from winter the way it always had, the way it always would. The documents, she said. My attorney finished the final review.
I know. She contacted mine. She had 3 modifications. I read them. They're reasonable. He paused. More than reasonable. She looked at him. I'm going to sign them. He was still. I've thought about this for 4 months, she said. I've looked at it from every angle. I've asked myself whether I'm doing it for the right reasons or whether I'm doing it because of a crisis that made everything feel urgent and important, and the answer is that both things can be true simultaneously. She paused. The reasons are right. The structure is honest, and I know who you are well enough now to know that the man I'm making this agreement with is the same man who will honor it in 6 months and 2 years from now. She held his gaze. I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm not doing it because I have nowhere else to go. I have somewhere to go. I built it. She gestured at the room around them. I'm doing it because it's what I want, and I haven't said that about something in a very long time.
Luca looked at her for a long time. Outside, a bus went past. A group of kids crossed the street at the corner. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music through a speaker with the volume up, and the sound came through the clinic's front window, muffled and warm. I spent 7 years thinking about who you were, he said, making assumptions, filling in details, building a version of you from a handful of facts and one night in a trauma bay. He paused. The actual person is entirely different from the version. Better or worse? Not better or worse. He shook his head. More. Much more. He looked at his hands. More complicated. More certain of herself. More... He stopped. More everything. You don't fit the frame I built. You broke it about 3 hours in. She looked at him. You should have better frames. I'm working on it. She stood up. I have 2 more patients this morning, and then I'm done. If you want to still be here at noon, I'll let you buy me lunch. You'll let me. I'm a medical director now. I don't say it any other way. The not-quite smile broke through entirely, became an actual smile, real and unguarded and doing something significant to his face. And she saw it and thought that it was a good thing and a real thing, and that she was glad to be the cause of it. She walked back to the examination room. He sat in the waiting room of the clinic she had built on the street she had chosen in the neighborhood she had come from, and he waited, which was something he knew how to do. And the morning moved forward the way mornings do. Not toward an ending, but toward whatever comes after. The worst thing has passed, and the work of being alive picks up again, specific and demanding, and against all reasonable expectation worth it. The spring light came through the window. The street moved. Nadia Valez, who had been humiliated at a dinner table in November and had walked out into the snow and gotten into a car going somewhere she didn't know, sat across from a patient in an examination room on North Kedzie and listened to him describe his symptoms with the full and complete attention of a person who had finally, after a long detour through everything that diminished her, returned to exactly who she had always been. Outside, Chicago continued, and that in the end was everything. Fade out.